Hi friends, David here from Learn Stage Lighting, and today we're going to take a look at the Obsidian NS8 and how we can use it to configure show networks. Now, the cool thing about this, and this isn't really a review, it's a little bit different than our review videos typically because it's not really a review, is that the NS8 to me is such a winner in terms of a entertainment network switch for like three big reasons, okay? Number one is it's honestly the lowest cost gigabit managed switch with EtherCons out there on the market at the time of this recording. It's, so that's killer. But more than that, it has all the features under the hood with VLANs and DHCP servers and tracking and QoS that you would want in an entertainment network, specifically as you start to push things harder and do more networked things. So it has all the features. And it has everything under the hood that someone who's really advanced with networking would want to adjust. But it also keeps it really simple so that if you're like me or like a lot of people a few steps behind where I'm at, not a networking pro, but needing to use networking more and more in your lighting and it becoming a day-to-day thing, then I think it's just such a real winner because it makes it easy to set up fairly advanced things and do so without like pulling your hair out. See right there, because it's entertainment focused and it's focused on our applications. And anytime you start like looking this stuff up online or whatever, you'll probably notice that it gets confusing really quick because you're looking at stuff that is written by network engineers for generalized computer networking. And while this isn't any different, when you understand the specifics of our industry and you use a product like the NS8 that's designed for it, it just makes it a lot easier. So what I want to do first is show you like the really basics, show you kind of what I've got set up here in the studio that I'm running right now, and some of the advantages as to why a network switch like this can really make your life easier. So first and foremost, I just grabbed the Netron CLU software, the latest version, and install it. What that does is that goes and it finds my NS8 and it tells me the IP address. Now there's a default one, which I believe in the manual is 2.0.0.254, and we can put it on the screen. And if it's wrong, we can put David's wrong and then put the right one there. But I've changed it for my setup here for specific and testing and whatnot. So then you go ahead and at the time of this recording, pretty much everything in CLU other than this devices page pretty much dumps you out to the web browser, which, is fine, right? Then you get to these screens. So I'm going to start at the home screen, okay? And there's some really cool stuff here. This is like a really good overview of everything that's happening. So what I'm basically doing here with this setup is I've got the NX4 over there, which is it runs the lights in the background here, okay? And I've got, of course, there's something that's not working. Oops, I set it up wrong. So I had set up a trunk port, which I thought I was assigning to my computer. And turns out I assigned that to the NX4. And so I need to find out because I'm lazy, and I've been playing around, what port my computer's on. Looks like my computer is actually on 6, or we're gonna say so, but let's take a look at things. So at this home screen, you see some really cool stuff. So you see each port, what's on it, if it's pulling power, how much power it's pulling, real time, which is awesome. In fact, and what's cool is I've had this bird dog camera it's aging a little bit. It's getting a little bit old. That's our overhead camera here in the studio. And it's recently, after a couple power glitches where the power went out, it's had issues staying powered up on PoE. Why? I don't know. I sent it back to Bird Dog. They said it was fine. But most of my cheaper unmanaged network switches, even my Unify switch from Ubiquiti, can't power it. It throws an error. But the NS8's powering it great. And so, but it shows you all your ports, shows you what VLANs they're on, and what they're named. So the basic gist like here is I went in here and I said port 6 is now my trunk. So I made my trunk port 3, and I'm going to change that back to Onyx. Save. And then, hey, my pixel lights come back on, and then I take port 6, and that's actually going to be my trunk. Okay. And what's cool about this is that essentially I now from this port can either connect to another NS8 with just 1 gigabit network cable and see my ArtNet stuff, my Onyx network stuff, And my camera stuff, even though they're on completely different networks, even though they're in completely different IP address ranges. And so that's what's really cool about it. It basically makes a lot of things you might want to do on an AV network much, much easier. So let me walk through some of those big highlights, okay? So the first are those VLANs that you basically can go to these individual ports and within this switch segment different types of traffic. Why would you want to do that? Well, it's a gigabit connection. It's got a lot of bandwidth, but even with that, I've found, and students of ours have found that, protocols like ArtNet, for example, oftentimes don't do really well with internet networks. They like to be segmented. They like to be separate. Similarly, I believe Dante does do well on other networks, but there are some protocols that really don't like being on the network with other protocols, or maybe even you just, are sending different devices with different, in different rooms with different SACN streams, but on the same universes. Again, not the best practice, but it's the kind of thing where you can segment that all, put them on different VLANs inside the switch, and then they can go through the same physical piece of hardware, sending completely different types of data, and be separate, even though they're all plugged into the same thing. So a really good example of this would be, okay, I'm in here, port 1, 2 is Onyx, and 3 and 4, and then 5, 6, 7, and 8 are my SACN. That's what the VLANs are currently tagged as. I grabbed from one of the pre-built presets. But I can go and say I take my first 4 ports and make them audio. I could put my audio network on that. So then at front of house, I've got an NS8. I've got my audio VLAN plugged into it with a couple devices. I've got my lighting VLAN plugged into it with a couple devices. I run one Ethercon cable and a spare, and I'm a disconnected spare, to backstage. I then have that switch set up with the same VLANs on whatever ports, and then I've got audio equipment and I've got lighting equipment plugged in. And now, and I can even do video and keep them all separate, but run only one cable to front of house. This is especially awesome in permanently installed venues where it might be really a pain in the butt to run multiple cables between 2 points, but you need to keep some separate traffic. That's where setting up VLANs can be really valuable, but it's the kind of thing that even in something like, I really like Ubiquiti stuff, even in Ubiquiti, which is pretty easy to use, the VLAN structure can be really confusing. Why? Because there's a lot of things you can do with it, and because of that, there's a lot of options, which makes it more confusing if it's something you don't do a lot, which is kind of the definition of those of us in stage lighting, right? Is we have to work with networking, but we don't do a lot of it, right? So where does that leave us? Essentially, there's a lot of things you can set up, but I think my top things are you can set up VLANs. They're easy. They're color-coded on the NS8 itself. There's QoS, which stands for quality of service. And what QoS does, and what's really key about QoS, did I make it so I can't get to it? I might have made it so I can't get to it. That's okay, because I can go to CLU, and it's going to tell me that I stuck it in an IP address range that I can't get to. Yep, it totally did. But I'll fix that in a minute. But QoS means that quality of service. So different types of streams are tagged in different ways to have a priority so that, for example, if you're running a Dante network, you can then go ahead and turn on QoS for Dante specific signals. You just grab it from a little drop down, and then your Dante is prioritized over pretty much everything else, right? And so that's huge when you're streaming audio. Similarly, other types of traffic have these packets in it for QoS that say, hey, this is high priority, this is lower priority, and this switch is able to look across all of its VLANs and prioritize the most important stuff if it's running out of bandwidth. So really cool, really awesome, and just one of those, it's a really cool thing, I think, because a lot of people in live production, myself included, are continuing to do more and more and more with networks. And a lot of times there ends up being like 5 people setting up show networks on site, which is really not efficient. And the most efficient way I've seen it done is when companies send out someone just to do the network. But the problem is, on a lot of events, it's just not big enough to have someone who is full-time dedicated to networking. It's not going to be in the budget. So something like the Obsidian NS8 really bridges that gap where you can get started, set up some basic stuff really easy, and it doesn't take a networking degree or certification to be able to figure it out. And that's what I think is really awesome. So if you liked this, check out the NS8. Of course, Learn Stage Lighting gear is your place to get it. Don't get it anywhere else. Get it from us if you watch this. We'd love to be your dealer for this and everything else you need. We're also changing our name to Above AVL just because we've got more audio and video gear that we continue to add. So be aware of that, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks.